Our guest this evening is Guli Francis-Dehqani, Bishop of Chelmsford. Guli was born in Iran, where her father was bishop. When she was 14, her family was forced to leave the country in the wake of the Iranian Revolution. The family settled in Hampshire, where Guli's father remained bishop in exile. Guli studied music at the University of Nottingham. She then went on to study theology, eventually gaining a doctorate in 1998, and went on to hold various roles in the ministry before going part-time to raise her children in 2004. During this time, she lived with her husband Lee in Oakham, where Lee was team rector of Oakham. They have 3 children who all play musical instruments to a high level. In 2011, Guli returned to full-time ministry, and in 2017, it was announced that she would become the first bishop of Loughborough. In addition to her suffragan duties, she also had a focus on supporting BAME clergy, lay workers and congregations within the diocese. It was announced on the 17th of December 2020 that Guli was to translate to Chelmsford in 2021, becoming the diocesan bishop of the Diocese of Chelmsford. So Guli, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's a real privilege to have you. The quote you gave for me today was, "This too shall pass," and amen to that. This year has been challenging for all of us, and we very much hope that it will pass and that we'll return to normal very soon. What would you say has been the most challenging aspect of this year for you personally?
Well, good evening, Sarah, and thank you for your warm welcome. It's really good to be here. Well, I think that the most challenging aspect has been lack of kind of human contact in the way that we've been used to in the past. And despite the wonders of Zoom, which make occasions like this possible and are beginning to feel all too normal, I think nothing quite replaces that physical contact. It leaves me wondering how it's going to change us going forward and how it's going to change life as we begin to emerge.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we all miss each other very much. So Guli, you were born in Iran and you spent your childhood there. So what are your first musical memories of that time?
Yeah, I do remember music being a fairly significant part of my life. I'm the youngest of 4 children by quite a long way, and my older siblings were musical, in particular my brother and my elder sister. So I have lots of memories of them at the piano and singing and playing music. So it was just kind of always there. And I think I had some very basic piano lessons from my mum, who played just a little bit. So it was part of life, but it wasn't hugely significant, I suppose. It was just always there.
Yeah. How did you settle on the flute as your instrument?
Well, that was after I arrived in England at the age of 14. I was very keen at that stage to kind of soak up all the opportunities that were suddenly available to me, because at school, really, there'd been nothing available in Iran in that sense to me. So my formal musical education didn't begin until I arrived here, until I was 14, 15. And I wonder whether I was guided by a music teacher who very wisely said that actually the flute was much more realistic starting at that age than, say, a string instrument would have been. So secretly, really, I would love to have played a string instrument, but I think I was just a bit too late to get on that bandwagon. And the flute actually worked really well, and it did mean that I was able to progress reasonably quickly. It became a huge part of my life for a while, at least.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's time for your first choice, Guli. So what is it and why have you chosen it?
So I've chosen Fauré's Requiem, which will be very well known to everyone, I'm sure. It's one of the earliest pieces that I recall becoming familiar with. My brother, who, as I say, was quite a bit older than me and was really very musical, he had studied at Oxford University and been very involved in the musical life there. And he'd conducted Fauré's Requiem. And so I came to know it when I was quite young and have just always loved it. I think it's glorious music. The In Paradisium at the end seems to me a perfect vision of what heaven might be like. And I particularly love the Liberame, which is why I chose it. If I had to choose one bit of it, that's what I would choose.
Okay, well, let's hear it. So Guli, during your teenage years, a life-changing and tragic event occurred, the attempted assassination of your father and the murder of your brother. How do you think you managed to cope during that time?
Well, I think in some respects, children are much more resilient than sometimes we give them credit for. It was just my lived experience. So I in a sense, I had no choice. But I think now when I look back, the security of knowing that, I was loved and I was in a happy home environment just made all the difference. And again, looking back, I realized that through those very, very difficult days, my parents modeled for me a way of living, which I suppose, tried to emulate ever since, which was to hold together in tension the kind of call for justice with a forgiving spirit and a desire not to become bitter by life's difficult and tragic experiences. So their influence, I mean, they've both died now, but their influence has been enormous in my life and continues to be a bit of a guiding light, I guess.
Yeah, no, sure. And I'm sure a lot of children at this moment could benefit from that. You were sent to boarding school, which must have been a tremendous culture shock for you. How did you adapt to that?
It was a massive culture shock to go from revolutionary Iran, which had been so chaotic and disruptive, to quite a small provincial boarding school, which was quite restrictive in many, many respects. And I don't know. I mean, looking back on it, there was lots I didn't understand in the first instance, assumptions that were made about the use of language and things like that, which I just didn't get. And I never really enjoyed it, I don't think, but I did lap up the opportunities that were suddenly in front of me in terms of musical involvement, in terms of drama, in terms of sport. So I wasn't really that academic at school, but I threw myself into it, and I just knew instinctively that this was my new reality and I had to get on with it. And I made some good friends and I had some good experiences, but it was a very strange contrast.
Yeah, we obviously touched on your decision to start learning the flute, but when did you think that you might want to take your musical studies further onto university level?
Well, I sometimes wonder now whether it wasn't, in a sense, the best choice, in that I'd really started way too late to ever be of a standard that was going to enable me to kind of keep up music as a profession or anything like that. But it was a bit of a love affair, I think, if I'm honest. I just loved being involved in music in my school years, and there was nothing else particularly drawing me. And I think in those days, it was much easier to go and study what you loved and to not worry too much about the future. I think we were much more carefree now than, I've got a son at university now. I think the pressures on them are far, far greater. I just went and I had a ball and enjoyed it for 3 years, threw myself into it. But I never realistically had the chance of being making my money from music, as it were, making my living. But it was a great time.
Oh, good. Well, it's time for your second choice, Guli. So what is it and why have you chosen it?
So this takes me back to my university years, actually, as an undergraduate. As I've said, I was very involved in music making in all kinds of different ways. And Beethoven 7 is one of the pieces that I conducted at one of our student orchestra concerts. So I've got very fond memories of that time, and it takes me back to that. I particularly love the slow movement. I just think it's wonderful, wonderful music. I'm fascinated also about its structure and form, which ties in a sense for me with my kind of theological understanding of life and death in a way, I guess. I'm told, and I may be incorrect about this, that there's, you've got musicians there who may well correct me, but my understanding is that the symphony's entire coherence is predicated just on the harmonic components of the opening 15 bars, which just is astonishing. That the larger global structure, if you like, is determined by what happens at the very start. There are some very fast-moving passing modulations in the first 15 bars, which prevent a satisfactory arrival at the key of A major, and then a whole cyclical formula follows, which means that the perfect cadence in A major is delayed right until the very end of the symphony. And theologically speaking, for me, this says something about life, which takes us with all its uncertainties and contradictions and paradoxes and lack of clarity to the kind of final goal, which is life after death and heaven and the kind of paradise, I guess. So yeah, I love this piece, and it speaks to me in all kinds of ways, and it reminds me of being young.
Wow, right, let's hear it. I agree. There is definitely something otherworldly about Beethoven. It'll be interesting to see whether anybody does have any comments about that afterwards. Obviously, after you'd studied music, you made the decision to follow studying theology. So how did you get to that point?
I think, like much in my life, it was probably a little bit of an accident. If I'm absolutely honest. So after I graduated, I started to work at the BBC for a few years, where again, I was very happy. I worked initially at World Service Radio in a kind of sound production. I was what's called a studio manager. And then moved across to being a producer in Radio 4 for a short while, by which time I'd got married and my husband was starting to train to be ordained. And so we moved out of London for him to do that, which meant that I left the BBC. And really, I was at a stage where I was wondering what to do next. And I came across the opportunity of doing an MA in theology at Bristol University, and they were good enough to take me without a first degree in theology. And so it kind of started from there. I did the MA and the PhD, and I think I was just at a stage in life where I was kind of exploring what was going to be next and what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And it was friends, a number of different friends and people who knew me, who said, have you ever thought about being ordained? And I guess it became part of my exploration. And so I thought, well, I'll see if this is meant to be or not, and entered the process of selection and discernment, as it's called, and it went from there, really.
So you then decided that you were going to follow a career in the ministry, which has led to where you are today. Did you ever believe at that time that your career would follow the trajectory that it has?
No, absolutely not. I mean, when I was first ordained, women weren't even allowed to be bishops in the Church of England. This is an example of how the church sadly often lags behind.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten that. Yes, it's
a number of these issues, and yeah, we probably don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But so no, I was ordained, and I was just really following my sense of vocation and calling, and I then had children, and kind of stepped right out of the if there is such a thing as a career path in the church, which I don't really think there is, but I stepped right out of it because I then went part-time and never worked full-time again until my post as Bishop of Loughborough. So as far as I was concerned, the children became my priority for a long season. And in some ways, it was quite a relief. I just thought, well, I'm out of any sense of where is this going to go? And I just followed my heart in every job that I did do and got my head down and tried to serve as faithfully as I could wherever I happened to be. So it really came very much out of the blue. We were living in Rutland, as you've said, where my husband was vicar. I was working for the Diocese of Peterborough, just again part-time, looking after clergy in their first posts. As far as I was concerned, I was kind of minding my own business, quietly getting on with life. So it came very much from left field. I wasn't expecting, I wasn't on the pathway that would have naturally taken me that way, as it were. Yes, it very much took me by surprise. And likewise with my new post in Chelmsford, again, absolutely not what I would have expected. I expected to finish my working life in Loughborough. So it's come again as a huge surprise, and I still kind of sometimes wonder how on earth it happened. But there you go.
Oh, that's lovely. So it's time for your fourth track, Guli. So what is it, and why have you chosen it? Sorry, your third track, not your fourth track. Yes.
So you've mentioned that my children are all quite musical, and I think I now mainly live my musical life through them. I have so little time myself to engage, and my eldest is a cellist, and I absolutely love the cello, so I did want to get a cello piece in, and I was also quite keen to get a female composer in somehow, and I think that Nadia Boulanger and her sister indeed are fantastic and have provided us with lots of great music. And these three cello pieces are just they're fun. They've got a bit of everything. I remember my son doing this for his grade 8. I think I remember listening to him for hours on end practicing it. We might even be able to listen to it all. I don't know. It's not very long, so there was a bit of motivation around that as well, to get a piece that we might hear from beginning to end. But
I'm not sure I've quite got it all, but I know what you mean. It's not too long, but I think we've got the bulk of it. Okay, let's hear it.
The third movement is worth people finding and listening to, because it's full of fun and really fast and exciting. And yeah, I mean, they're all great, but it was the third one I particularly had in mind.
Okay, well, everyone can now go away and find that movement. So that's a nice, yeah. With your children then, did they show musical interest from the outset, or did you need to encourage them, or?
Well, Gabriel, who's the eldest, was really fortunate. It was while we were living in Oakham, and in those days, I think he might have been amongst the final cohort, but it was in the days when the council used to offer free group music lessons. And a cellist and a violinist went into Oakham C of E, where he was one day, and they were offering kind of free trials. And I think a teacher or his head teacher or somebody said, "Go on, have a go." And he ended up in the queue for the cello teacher. All of this was unbeknown to me. He came home that evening. He was 7 at the time, and he came over that evening, and he said to me, "Oh, I learnt to play the cello today." So that was really the start of it. And he was then selected for group council lessons for 1 year, and it very quickly was apparent that he had something, and at the end of the year his teacher agreed to offer to take him on as a private pupil, and it went from there really. And I guess until the age of around 13, 14, I did have to press quite hard, because I could see the talent. But he didn't really start owning it for himself until he was about 14, 15. And that's when it really started to take off for him. So yeah, he's very keen, and he's just completing a degree in music and then going off to do a performance masters at the Guildhall next year. Yeah, it's a huge joy to me. But the other two, then I think, seeing him, that was enough to give them the motivation they needed, and so they both play. They're twins, and Simeon particularly is really keen and is becoming quite a nice and capable musician. Eleanor less keen, but determined not to be entirely left out, and so she does still play. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. So Guli, you were ordained as a bishop, obviously at Canterbury Cathedral in 2017, and you were the first Persian woman to become a bishop. And during the service, your eldest son, Gabriel, who you've mentioned, played the cello, performing variations on music that had been composed by your brother Bahram for a Persian hymn written by Bahram and your father. And the choir also sang music composed by Gabriel and set to a Persian poem and words from St. John's Gospel. So that must have been incredibly moving for you and such a proud day. Can you take us back to that day and your reflections on it?
I was just kind of carried through the day, but I have very happy memories of it. I was often bishops are ordained in twos and threes. It's not always that that you're on your own. So I think because I was on my own, it gave me a little bit more flexibility and the ability to kind of make quite personal choices in the music, in the hymns and so on. And so, yeah, it was lovely to involve Gabriel, and the choir, the Canterbury choir piece was fantastic, really, because mercifully it was quite a short piece that he'd written 6 months or so before, but they very willingly took it on and of course performed it beautifully. And yeah, it tied together that service so many elements of my life, you know, from my childhood through to my present day with obviously Gabriel's involvement and the children there. But there were lots of things that reflected my background and childhood. And one of the hymns was sung in both languages, in English and Persian. And there was a lot that reflected my background, I suppose, which continues to inform really who I am and how I minister, and it'll always be that way, I think.
Yeah. So it's time for your fourth choice, Guli. What is it?
This is a Brahms piano intermezzo in A major. I wanted something. My brother was a pianist, and I wanted something in this genre, and it could have been a number of things. It might have been a Rachmaninoff elegy, it could have been a Schubert nocturne, you know, it could have been any number of things. But it just so happens that my second son Simeon is learning this piece at the minute, so I'm hearing it a lot, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful piano piece, and I think Brahms is his melodies are always very appealing.
That's just lovely. I mean, it's funny. Although while I've been doing this, there's been such a diverse range of music. Often people pick Brahms. Often it just comes up so much, and it obviously speaks to people. So yeah, it's a good choice. So Guli, obviously part of your career, a big part of your career has been encouraging diversity in the ministry, I guess, and probably in other walks of life as well. Funnily enough, we've been discussing within the orchestra this week the importance of promoting diversity, and obviously it's come up in music, hasn't it, a lot with the advent of Chinica and orchestras like that. So what do you think we can all do really to try and encourage it in all areas of our life?
Well, it's a huge and complex issue, isn't it? But at its heart, I wonder whether it's the kind of human instinct to stick with what you know and to be fearful or suspicious of what you don't know. And crossing that boundary is, it takes a bit of courage, it takes a bit of guts, but actually it's also life-giving and can lead to all kinds of exciting and creative opportunities and possibilities. And I think that's true for diversity in every area. It widens our perspective, and it creates opportunities that we wouldn't even begin to imagine if we didn't experience how things are from the perspective of others. So that's, I think, at the heart of it. But it is surprisingly difficult as human beings, because I think it is our natural instinct to stick with what is safe and what's familiar. And we need that to an extent. We do need that to form deep relationships and so on. So I think it has to be embracing diversity has to be an intentional act, if you want, if you like, or we have to kind of work at it, and we have to really want to do it. But then it can open all kinds of doors and possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing about different composers, and how many of them were gay and so on. And do you think that there's something about the arts that attracts diversity, if you like, or not? Or
well, it attracts creativity, doesn't it? And also it's a form of self-expression. And with music in particular, amongst the arts, it also brings people together. So it provides a shared language, regardless of what other differences there are. So I've been really taken. I came across them first some years ago. Others will know them, of course, as well. But the Silk Road Ensemble, which was set up by Yo-Yo Ma, and deliberately brought together, or brings together still, I think, musicians from across the world, not so much to find the lowest common denominator, what can we do together, but actually to create music which is entirely new and different and other, by combining the best elements and finding ways of bringing those alongside one another. It's just so exciting. So I think music, I suppose its capacity to allow people self-expression, and also to bring people together to perform together. It's a very collaborative form of art form, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's a great platform for encouraging diversity.
Great. So it's time for your fifth choice, Guli. So what is it, and why have you chosen it?
So this is a piece by Frank Bridge, and it's number 4 of his miniatures for piano trio. It's not a piece I've known for that long. We came across it a couple of years ago when we were looking for a piece that our 3 children could play together at a concert in memory of my brother at Oxford. And we stumbled across these trios, and this is the one that they played at the concert. And the concert happened to be the last live concert we went to before lockdown. It was just before the first lockdown, in March. What would that be? Was it 2020? Or I forget now whether it was 2020 or 2019. But anyway, early March, before we went into lockdown. And then they became a little bit of a kind of lockdown project for us. We played them in different variations all through the first lockdown, and I've become very fond of them.
Oh, lovely. Let's hear it. It's just beautiful. To say, I was not familiar with Bridge or that piece before now, and just lovely, isn't it?
It is, and the best of it is yet to come in the bit that you didn't get around to playing. So if people do
know, it's always really difficult when I'm editing these things to sort of know which bit. But yes, I know what you mean. Well, I say it gives people a taster, and they can go away and listen to the whole thing. So Guli, I think really just what I wanted to touch on towards the end really is the whole journey. I mean, can you really believe, kind of looking back on your life now, your start off in Iran and your journey to this point, can you sort of almost somehow quite believe where you are now? Do you ever have to pinch yourself and think, oh gosh, crumbs, I've been ordained in Canterbury Cathedral and
I mean, it's amazing how the twists and turns of life take one in unexpected directions, and yet, although the pathway that I traveled, in some ways it's very surprising that it's brought me to this point. In other ways, I kind of have a deep sense of it all making sense, that somehow everything that I've experienced has brought me to this place, and I feel at ease with that. I mean, that's not to say I'm not overwhelmed and have a great sense of inadequacy in the face of the challenges that lie ahead, because there are very many significant chelmsford diocese, and I do at times feel totally overwhelmed and inadequate, and yet I kind of have a deep sense of peace that I am for the moment in the right place, and I'm following that sense of calling, and it's a privilege to be able to feel that and to do that. I recognize that. So yeah, it's a long way from Esfahan, Iran, where I was born and grew up. But all of that is absolutely a part of who I am now. I wouldn't be the person I am now without that. And the older I get, the more aware of that I become. It continues to inform the person I am and the person I'm becoming. I feel in a sense that in a sense now I'm in the establishment, as it were. Unbelievably, I'll be going into House of Lords in the summer, and yet I feel like what's happened is my presence here means that what is very, very marginal, which is a tiny Christian community, persecuted Christian community in Iran, has been kind of drawn into the center of the establishment, and I feel that weight very heavily. I feel like I represent a tiny bit of God's kingdom, which is the church in Iran, and that really motivates me to keep going.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So it's time for your sixth choice, Guli. So what is it, and why have you chosen it?
So I felt I really had to choose some Shostakovich. I love Shostakovich, and there's a whole mixture of reasons for this. I find his music beguiling, really, and it's everything from exciting and difficult to engage with, to melodic, to inventive, to quirky, and it's always energetic and exciting. In fact, I think it's only just suddenly come back to me. I think I've heard the Rutland Sinfonia play. It might have been Shostakovich 9, I can't remember, but I brought Gabriel to hear you doing a Shostakovich symphony. And I'm conscious also that I haven't chosen specifically a flute piece of music, and Shostakovich often gives the flutes a really prominent part, so that was another reason for choosing some Shostakovich. I could have chosen any number of pieces, and I'm also fascinated, and this is true, I guess, of Beethoven, but arguably any number of other composers. I'm fascinated by the way in which adversity in life and living through incredibly difficult circumstances can draw out such incredible genius and creativity. And of course, that's true of Shostakovich through the years of communism and Stalin and so on. It's true of Beethoven with the deafness and so on, and of many others. So the connection between creativity and adversity or hardship is one that fascinates me.
Yeah, let's hear it. That actually sounds like great fun to play.
I wouldn't be able to play it now. It's a long one, but it does. The player there certainly made it sound like fun.
Yeah, I have to try to persuade Paul to do that one soon. Lovely. Well, Guli, thank you so much for letting us hear your musical choices and for telling us about your life. So really, without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to questions. I think Catherine Hammond is fielding questions. So
Jean and Bob were just we're interested to know what life is like for the Christian community in Iran at the moment, that where you once were. Do you know what life is like for them now?
Thank you for that question. I mean, life is precarious, I guess, is one way of describing it. Life in Iran is difficult for many people at the minute, partly because sanctions continue and the economy is not in a great state, and there is a great deal of uncertainty and precariousness in many respects. But for the Christian community, which is now absolutely tiny, it's lots of uncertainty. Persecution kind of comes and goes in waves, I guess, but people certainly aren't free to share their faith, and the church is unable to baptize new members, for example. So the future is uncertain, but there is a kind of very small faithful remnant who continue there and with whom I have some contact. So I always feel it's one of my roles is to ensure that they're never forgotten, and they're a very small but precious part of God's kingdom.
Absolutely, yeah. Rachel was interested to know if there was a piece of music that you've never conducted that you fancy conducting.
Oh my goodness, there's loads of pieces of music I've never conducted. I mean, I could count on one hand probably the pieces I have conducted. I do kind of from time to time think, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have another go? I don't know. I don't know what the result would be. I mean, if you'd like to invite me to come and have a go, by all means do. But it would be more fun.
And David, who's a fellow flautist, is asking, what flute do you have, or did you have? I don't know if you still got a flute.
I do still have a flute. Yeah, that's a good question. The actual body itself is just a Yamaha of sorts. It was nothing special, but I did for my 18th, I think, birthday, my parents bought me a handmade silver head joint, which of course is where the kind of real quality of the sound comes from. I mean, to my shame, I can't remember the name of the maker now. It just shows you how long it is since I've properly got the flute out of the case. But yeah, the actual body was nothing very special at all. But I do still have this silver head joint, which meant that I think the quality of the sound was always better than my technical skill was, which in some ways is good, because when I do get it out, then it's fairly easy just to play along as long as the music's simple and feel that there's a reasonable sound quality there. But I can't remember the name of the maker.
Have a look, Gully. If it says Mike Allen on it, you're on to a winner. He's one of the greatest flute head makers. I've got one, fortunately, and you're right, it makes the flute just sing.
Okay, well, I will go and check. Doesn't ring a bell, that, and that would be me landing on my feet, wouldn't it? But yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, Paul did have a question, not about conducting particularly, but he just asked you whether you feel that music has a spiritual dimension to it. But it probably does, doesn't it?
I mean, definitely for me it does, because it helps express the inexpressible. You know, the things that when we run out of words and can no longer find ways of articulating what it is we're feeling or thinking or believing, for that matter, then music kind of takes over and can help do that. So for me, absolute there is, and you know, Beethoven is a good example of that for me. Something about, you know, touches the soul in a way and connects us to something beyond ourselves. And for me, as a Christian, is an expression of creativity that we have through the divine, if I can put it like that. So yeah, for me, absolutely it is.
I was going to ask you about that actually. I mean, Guli, I mean, even in sort of large music concerts and you know, sort of, which aren't obviously religious in their sort of production or anything like that, but I do sometimes think people do feel a sort of spiritual connection or experience through going to concerts. Do you agree? I mean, I certainly do. I think it's just like we were saying earlier, it's almost that connection of being around with other people.
Yeah, you can sit and lose yourself and just listen, can't you? And just follow along with the music.
And that shared experience, I suppose, you know, that everybody at that moment is sharing the same moment.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure people experience it in all different kinds of ways. And some people may not describe it as a spiritual experience, but yeah, others will. And of course, there's kind of century, Bach, I suppose, being the prime example of that. So in a sense, certainly the Western Christian culture is infused with music, which is just almost becomes difficult to separate where faith and belief and religion end and where music begins. They're just totally enmeshed, particularly in the English church culture, I guess, but also the German and European more generally. So
Rachel's a couple of quotes that she's had in front of her desk during the pandemic, but one particular I think would resonate. Sometimes music is the only medicine the heart and soul need. I think is nice, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Rachel also used to live near Chelmsford, so she asked, what have you found you like about Chelmsford so far?
You'd think that would be a sensible question, wouldn't you? But I've hardly been down to Chelmsford. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing. The entire appointment process has happened by Zoom. And I'm still living in Loughborough or near Loughborough. So I've been down in total 3 times, I think, once to see the house that we'll be living in and twice to meet some of my new colleagues. But really, I don't know it at all. The children who are going to be going to school there still haven't seen the schools that they'll be at. So yeah, Chelmsford and us are taking one another on trust, I think, and looking forward to getting to know one another.
How old are your children? What sort of years, what stages are they going into at school?
So the eldest is just finishing university, and the younger two, who are twins, are 16, and they've just had their GCSE assessments. Yeah.
Big move for them all around then, isn't it?
It is. Changes.
Rachel said there's lovely open spaces not far from Chelmsford if you like walks, and
excellent.
You have dogs that need walking.
Yeah. I'm told parts of Essex are very, very beautiful, and of course big parts of it across the coast. It's as a diocese, it's a huge and diverse diocese because it includes the whole of Essex and 5 boroughs in East London. So very, very diverse, very large and quite complex, but also very exciting and full of creativity and diversity. So I mean, I'm really looking forward to getting to know it better.
Catherine just wants to say it was lovely to see and hear you. You know each other, don't you? So
hi, Catherine. Yeah, lovely to know that Catherine's here. We knew each other reasonably well. Our children, at least some of them, are similar ages, and from time to time we're in touch. Catherine, it's always good to hear from you and to see you, and lots of love to you and the family.
It's horribly surprising how much you realise you miss someone when you suddenly haven't had contact for so long, and then suddenly they pop back up into your life. So it's incredibly lovely to see you, and we'll have a catch up hopefully again soon.
Thank you, Catherine. Who's that in the background with you? I can't quite see.
Lucy with me here.
Lucy.
William's down in Portsmouth currently. He's singing down in Portsmouth Cathedral. So just Lucy with us now.
And Lucy, lovely to see you. And
you too.
Hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Yeah.
Would you ever like to play in an orchestra again, or do you think you've sort of done that and you enjoy just listening to music now, going to concerts yourself?
I don't think any orchestra would want me any longer, if I'm honest. I think that ship has sailed probably, and I need to just enjoy listening to other people. Yeah. But never say never. Who knows? Maybe at some point in the future there'll be an opportunity again.
Is your husband musical? Does he play anything?
He doesn't actually, no, and he would say he's not. His brother is very naturally musical, although he's never really had opportunities to learn formally. But he's one of those people who can sit at the piano and just play tunes that he knows. But I don't quite know how he does that. It comes very naturally to him. But neither of them have ever had any kind of formal lessons or anything.
I was just going to ask if there are any further sort of ambitions, and I mean that in the widest sense, and it could be anything in any direction in your life, any sort of things that you feel might lie in front of you, or you'd like to explore, or feel you want to include in your life or in the future.
I don't know. I mean, yes and no, I suppose. In some sense, I try very much to focus as much as I can on the present, and be at peace with whatever's brought me to that point, and not be too much kind of leaning into what might be next. I think it's a real blessing, I think, when we can do that well and really concentrate on the gift of the present moment. But of course, I'm aware that there are challenges ahead for me in terms of my work, and over and above anything else. I'm grateful to have a stable and a loving home environment, and that's the thing I'm most, I don't know whether proud is the right word, but it gives me deep joy to know that I've got 3 children who are certainly at present, reasonably well-rounded and secure and happy, and they remain my focus, whatever else is going on in my life. I have taken on just very recently the role of Bishop for Housing, which is a new role in the Church of England, following on from the Archbishop of Canterbury's commission on housing, and addressing really what is now an enormous crisis, actually, with 8 million people in this country living in poor quality housing in some shape or another. So I feel it a huge privilege to be involved in that work. I'm learning very fast about the whole world of housing, and trying to find ways of ensuring that the church can lead not just by what we say about housing, but actually how we use some of our own land. There are huge challenges ahead in that, and I don't have any power or influence to make anybody in the church do anything they don't want to, but I have got the opportunity to be part of kind of setting out a vision which hopefully people will capture, and I would absolutely love to see the church leading by example in putting our land to good use, and being part of addressing this crisis, which needs partnership across the whole housing sector and needs government to set long-term policies and strategies and so on. But if we can play our small part, and if I can have been a part of that, then I would be absolutely delighted.
Yes. Do you see your time in the Lords as having opportunities to make change and give you a different sort of voice in that direction?
Definitely. I mean, that there are, regardless of the rights and wrongs, is it still right to have bishops in the House of Lords? We could have that discussion, but I think while we're there, we need to be there and making an influence, being an influence for good, and that is my intention. And I'm sure that one of the reasons the Archbishop of Canterbury asked me to take on the role of Bishop for Housing was because he wants somebody to take it into the Lords, as it were, and to be a voice for it there. So the reason I'm going straight into the House of Lords is that when the legislation was passed to allow women to be bishops, in order to try and get the more women into the House of Lords sooner, the legislation was passed that for the first 10 years, any woman who was made a diocesan bishop would go straight into the House of Lords, rather than it's done by kind of longevity normally. So there are 5 bishops who are there as of right, and then the remaining 21 is on the basis of who's served the longest. But for the first 10 years of women bishops, women are going straight in, which is why I'm going straight in, which is very unnerving, because it doesn't really give me a chance to settle into the role in Chelmsford before going into Lords. But of course, we'll bring opportunities and we'll open up another whole world of learning. And I seem to have been on a permanent steep learning curve for the last few years, and I'm almost perpetually out of my comfort zone, but also having a very exciting time and meeting amazing people and learning as I go, and just trying to play my part in that.
Yeah, and the final question, and in amongst all this busyness, which I hugely admire you for, will you please continue doing those wonderful Radio 4 for the Day broadcasts, which we, as a family, because I come to school with my 2 sons, and we listen out for different people each morning, and we love it when you come on. It just feels as if we're sort of travelling through Loughborough, listening to you on the radio. There's something quite extraordinary about that. And then onto the motorway, and you're still with us.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Paul, and I hope there'll be an opportunity to come and hear the Sinfonia again at some point. As I say, I have happy memories of doing that, and I wish you all the best as we begin to emerge from lockdown, and hope that very quickly you will all get back to doing what you love to do, which is to play and provide music for others. So every blessing to all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Guli, and thank you so much for being here tonight. And
Thank you very much, all.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Gully.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.